All right, let's get into our first topic then. And is poor mental health to blame for record numbers of young people being out of work? Get your calls in for this one now. Youth worklessness has risen to 1.2 million. That's the highest figure in a decade. Experts have previously blamed an acceleration of mental health conditions after the pandemic for young people being out of work. Now, in the past year, over 250,000 young people were off work with long-term sickness, which most often means depression, bad nerves or anxiety. So, do we need to cut young people some slack? Paula, what do you think?
Absolutely, because of course it's not mental ill health that is to blame. It's the lack of support. It's the limited access that these young people have in terms of getting their mental health treatment, what they require. And of course, what we know is that the government have failed to deal with the significant reduction in professionals that are available, that are skilled to work in this particular area of medicine. We have this massive number of people across the age groups, Storm, who are struggling with their mental health. And there simply isn't, as I say, that professional network in place because we have failed to employ them. We've failed to go out and search and put in active measures to ensure that we have all these professionals there in place. They're all off in Australia. That's what we're being told. And so it's no surprises that we see now people who are struggling, who aren't able to access that support, who then obviously cannot make themselves available. On top of that, though, Storm, we're not only talking about young people and their mental health, we're also talking about young people who suffer with neurodevelopmental diagnoses, various different issues in relation to that, and who are carers. The social contract in general to our young people has been broken. We are letting them down.
And we have just been through a pandemic, and that, of course, would have an impact on a young person's mind. So maybe we do need to cut young people some slack, James.
I don't think it's about cutting slack, and I also think that we need to stop with the blame game, because I'm not sure that solves any problems, and I'm certainly not going to gloss over the issue of mental health, which is very serious for some. However, it is something where there's contagion. And because of the way that social and digital media has operated, a lot of people have thought, oh, they've got this, so I've got it too. And there's a lot of discussion where people who genuinely are just having a bad day and it has been misinterpreted, oh, it's a mental health thing. And therefore, it's become such a sort of toxic issue because we haven't quite worked out how to deal with it, that as soon as somebody says, oh, I'm having mental health problems, or I'm having mental health issues, or I can't do this, or I can't do that, leave me alone. It's become almost acceptable to say that and then unacceptable to then even tackle it. So for some, it is genuinely a problem. I get that. For some, it just isn't. And we've allowed, and our society has allowed, when there have been so many opportunities provided in higher education. We've never had so many opportunities for people to go to university and to continue their studies. We've never had so many opportunities for people to basically do the jobs that they want to do. But we've also imported so much labour into our market to do the jobs that our younger people don't think that they want to do. That it's beneath them. They've been told that it's beneath them, so therefore they don't want to go off and do it. They don't want to do the jobs that might be hard or nasty or difficult or not exactly what they want to do. So I think there are a whole load of society problems that we have created. I think there are mental health issues, but I think cutting slack and blaming is not going to solve the problem.
That's a much kinder view than I thought you were going to give, that actually some people do truly believe they're suffering from mental health issues when they may not actually be suffering from chronic issues, maybe just acute issues. But there is the question of, I don't want to say back in my day, it does make me feel old when I say that, but when I was younger, it wasn't really an option to stay in your bed all day. Even if you had depression, it wasn't really an option to not take an exam because you were anxious about it. And I know some of my friends really suffered badly from all of those sorts of symptoms. But parents it was a non-negotiable. You were getting up and you were getting something done in the day. Is there a potential that we're lacking that in society?
And that's why I've referenced the social contract, because back in my day, you knew that if you passed your exams, you knew that if you got up and went to work, there was a visible pathway to success in whatever guise you wanted it to be it bricklayer, scaffolder, landscape gardener or barrister. You knew that you were going to be able to achieve what one would expect to be an ordinary standard of life, i.e. you'd be able to afford your food shopping, you'd be able to afford to go to work, you would be able to afford to rent or to purchase your own property within a really reasonable period of time. That doesn't exist anymore. And so on top of
And
this...
why not, though?
And why doesn't it exist anymore?
Yes.
Because we have failed our youth.
Now, how?
All right, we have failed them because what we have done is we have allowed society to be one that has become pushed by you can't say that you're not feeling well, because if you say that you're not feeling well, then you're just talking nonsense.
Yeah, but elephant in the room here, we have disrupted our labour market. We've disrupted our
with COVID, with lockdown.
No, with our immigration policies, and with our housing policies, and with our education policies.
I'm confused about that, because you know that statistically, when immigrants like myself
and me,
like myself, we come to a country, we come to work. We don't come to disrupt the labour market.
Correct.
We come to work.
Absolutely.
So
I'm not against immigration by any stretch of the imagination. If it wasn't for immigration, I wouldn't be here either. So it's not about that. But what it's about is that if you increase your population by 8 million, which we have, if you do not adjust your wage system, and when you talk about a social contract, we've broken that because we've basically imported labour, kept wages low, and then we've interfered with the market.
Since Brexit, we've seen an exodus of those employers that were coming in to do the more labour-intensive shifts. So we're talking about picking fruit from farms.
And our young people will not do those jobs.
Well, exactly.
And they should be forced to do those jobs.
I mean,
So
can we...
force them?
And this is what's quite interesting, because James told us he was going to start by not playing the blame game, and this is exactly what's happening. So what we do is we look at the reasons that our young people are giving us for why they feel that they cannot access the labour market. And the list is they don't feel that they have been given sufficient skills to enter the labour market. So that is how we have broken the system, because we have let our young people down.
They've never had more skills.
In relation to... That's what they're telling us in the research. So either we can ignore what they say,
or we can not to be on the list.
Or we can pay attention to that. The second thing that actually comes up is mental health. Third thing is the quality of jobs in the local area, because, of course, they cannot afford to travel very far to work. And so what is available in their local area? The fourth reason is in relation to neurodevelopmental issues. Then we have the high cost of living, and then we have the gap between the education that the young person has and what the employer is looking for.
But you see,
that is what our young people are telling us.
But you see,
so we're just going to dismiss that.
You've just created a massive word salad there, which is not dealing with the issues.
Hold on, we've got lots of calls coming in, so I do want to get to them. Elaine from the Highlands, what's your thoughts when it comes to young people and why they're neither in education nor working, nor looking for work?
Hi, I have a son who has ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia. There's a lot of learning things going on with ADHD. And he's been working from the age of 16.
Yes.
Now, I've tried to explain to him about worry. Everybody has worry. Worry's never gone.
No.
This new thing of anxiety. When I was younger, you worried about going to work. You worried about making money. You had stresses about work. You had fears. It's still the same, but now we've labelled it as anxiety, and then we're allowing people not to work because of it.
Elaine, I mean, well done. I feel weird saying well done to your son, because of course your son should be working. I mean, he has things that he has to overcome, but he's absolutely a contributing member of society, which is fantastic. But when we talk about anxiety and we talk about depression, if we have not suffered from those sorts of things, it is then very hard to comment on what is the difference between feeling nervous about going to sit an exam. For example, I used to get terrible nerves before exams. The best advice I was given was just take one step every morning, as in you wake up, that's your first step. Just go brush your teeth. That's your next step for the day. Don't think too far ahead in your day, and that really helped me. So there's coping mechanisms for when things are just a little bit stressful and you're finding it difficult. I think having a problem with your nerves and having an issue with anxiety may be medically different, and maybe we're undermining it. Is there a possibility of that, Elaine?
Or are we, instead of accepting it as stress, accepting it as a fear, as a worry, are we putting it down to anxiety? are we over complicating everything?
I mean, honestly, I don't know. I think you would have to get a mental health specialist to really differentiate between the two things. What is a normal human daily emotion and what is a condition that causes you to completely freeze?
But I think what Elaine talks about is spot on, which is for some, of course, there are mental health and real difficulties, which we probably didn't identify in the past, and people probably hid them and perhaps just worked their way through them. And for them, there is a real issue. For many others, because they see their friends or colleagues, or they see it in the papers, or they see it online and all this stuff, there is this contagion. And so I think we have to find a way to unpick the two. Because, look, life is difficult. Things are difficult. You cannot put these people down.
That's an emotional reaction. You're talking about a contagion. We don't have any stats to back that up, what you're saying. So
we know it's true.
We don't know it's true. You're referencing an emotion.
Demand for mental health services in the NHS suggests there's been an increase.
Exactly, and that's what we do know is true. And what we also know is true, of course, is that there isn't the professional support there in place. And what we do know is that there is a waiting list that can be up to a year. And what we do know is that people who suffer with their mental health also suffer a prejudice in relation to their mental health. And actually, that's what stops a lot of people coming forward and seeking the support they do.
But does that explain?
They will be dismissed as just being anxious.
No, sure. But does that explain the 1.2 million? Because as far as I can say and can see, and from experiences of having spoken in schools, of course, and as I've said, there are people who genuinely need help. And I would agree with you. I think the last government and this government, they're not acting quickly enough. But we've also created problems in society that you haven't addressed, that we haven't addressed, that we have to address in terms of housing and costs and money and jobs and all those things.
You're kind of in agreement with that, because Paula did make that point that there's an expectation when you get an education that you'll get a job and you'll be able to afford things in life, and that is just not there for young people today. Elaine, thank you very much for your call, and well done for instilling such a good work ethic into your son. Karen from Wigan, what's your view?
I'm sort of on both sides of the fence here. Because I realise there's a lot of issues with mental health problems in the young. And one person's mental health problems from a range of 1 to 10, like you were just saying, about anxiety, their anxiety can be number 10, whereas another person's anxiety may be only 2 or 3. Depends on how that actual individual is. And it's like from the areas that you come from. Do you know what I mean? From poverty-stricken areas to having to go through the teen problems at school, going through the drug cultures, having to fit in with the drug cultures. If you don't fit in with them, you're seen as
Karen, I'm hearing what you're saying, but we all had to suffer through that. Every generation up until Gen Z, we've all been through it, but we haven't had the mental health pressures, and we haven't had the record numbers of young people out of education, out of work, and not looking for work. So what has happened in the last 10 years that has meant that our young people just don't want to go to work or feel they can't?
Because the generation has just changed. There's too much stress for young people to cope with. I mean, one problem is getting to work, the stress of having the money in your purse to get on the bus, to travel to work. I mean, I can even remember donkeys years ago for myself and suffering from anxiety. I was up at 4 o'clock every morning, only to have between 4 and 5 o'clock, thinking about getting into work, how to get into work. Calming myself down or trying to calm myself down before I started work at 9 o'clock.
Yeah, exactly, Karen.
And then to actually go into a working environment.
I think that's what a lot of the older generation look at the younger generation and think, when they were younger, it wasn't that there wasn't any stresses, it was just there was no other option other than to get up and deal with them, I suppose, as you did. Maybe I'm being unfair though. Please, I'd love your views on this, Karen. Thank you for your call. Pat from Bath. What's your thoughts on why young people are neither in education, work, nor looking for work?
Well, I've been for years and years in the education system, and I think it's failing a lot of kids. Years ago, when I taught in the East End of London, the girls there got all kinds of dressmaking courses, commerce, this, that, and the other, typing, shorthand. They could do in school at 14, and that gave them some kind of possibility of a job. Okay. And then I worked mostly with children who had some problems, but were difficult. And I found that the way I could teach them the units I set up which was not curriculum based, they flourished, and some of them had real severe mental problems like autism and ADHD, but many of them were just difficult, unruly children who did not fit in the general thing that in the unit, where I made my own timetable up, we did our own things, they flourished.
That's really interesting, Pat. So actually our education system is too much of a cookie cutter, and we need to diversify and maybe have schools specialising in children that are neurodivergent or not fitting into that system.
The worst thing was, with the last job I had, which was with 14 plus delinquents, both sexes, all those kids were quite capable of doing practical things. They didn't get a chance. The boys loved to do things that were to do with woodwork, this, that and the other, and they didn't get the chance. They sulked around with me teaching them how to read and write at 14 and taking their remarks like I could smell dog shit coming down the corridor because they were so used to and difficult, and they were lovely kids.
I'm sure, Pat, you didn't mean that language, so we'll let that go. But thank you very much for your call. That was just thrown in there at the end. But what was interesting was both panel were nodding as you were talking about that. So actually, even though it might not be the one silver bullet that could solve this crisis, maybe it is something that we need to look at to help it out anyway. Just the education system and how that's set up for all pupils. Pat, thank you very much for your call.